Butler Burns, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to talk to us. I want to talk about your Zoom quilt that was on, what did we decide, August 16th?
Yes, yes, it was.
Yeah, well, John was the one, this is kind of scary, that said, look at that quilting.
Oh, well, I'm quite flattered.
Yeah, well, look at that quilting. Tell us
Yes.
about this quilt.
Well, actually, this quilt was one of three that I was doing for this exhibition that I had several years ago with Joe Pierce Patterson. And for myself, as I approached the design as well as the quilting, I said, okay, I'm really ready to push myself beyond my limits that as they have stood in the past. And so even the original design, I had wanted to play and work a little more abstractly. And so I'd started out with just this line drawing of this butterfly wing. All right. From there, I said, well, there's all these different design elements and processes. So then I went and did the tessellating of the wings and such, and created that level. So at that point, then, of course, I'm ready to create the quilt and move from there, but I enlarge the drawing and kind of do my freezer paper templates and glue basting, as well as then finally the machine applique, which is working with the clear thread. And then I'm at the point of quilting. So there it is. You've got this blank canvas and you go, oh my gosh, where do I go from there? So let me just step back and I will show the full quilt as much as I can here.
Right.
So with this one, again, I have those butterfly wings in the center.
Can you back up a little bit more? Back up a little bit more, okay?
All right.
And hold it up just a little bit. There we go. Okay, sorry.
Okay, nope, I'm glad I can't see the monitor. There.
Right.
So with this quilt, of course, I had the center of the butterfly wings, and I had those open spaces even in the different orange sections of the design.
Right.
And then, of course, I had the outer blue areas. So there was a lot going on. And for myself, I actually, have not done a whole lot with those feathers and everything. And so that was some of my challenge in saying, let me work with it in a larger scale and such. And so even in the orange sections,
right,
I worked out creating that feather, and I was working with different colored yarn or different threads. The design process for myself often is I spend so much time choosing the actual fabrics that I find I don't use lots and lots of contrasting threads, but similar ones. And so in the end, one ends up really seeing more of the texture of the quilting as I go.
Okay,
yes, go ahead.
But I say, okay, but now I get the wings. I get why feathers would be in there and all that, but that background, are you kidding me?
Well, I do love to use lots of different fabrics itself. So actually there's different blues, probably 7 different blue fabrics I use in that segmented background. So ultimately, even for myself, as I'm working with students and saying, okay, this is how you can suggest your quilting, I did start out even just echoing the butterfly wings from the beginning, and probably about 3 or 4 lines of that. And then there was part of that challenge of playing with my feathers, going about through that. And of course, there's different sections that were a little wider and narrower than others.
You could see that. All right. Did you pre-draw that, or did you just have at it?
No, I am my design process is working with an unabashed free motion style. And so I don't mark. And so that's where, for myself, I find myself spending time doodling on a piece of paper. I mean, every single time I sit down to quilt, I do the doodling on that paper first, and then I'll go ahead and then stitch it out even on a sample piece, because I got to practice with the threads and such.
Right.
But ultimately, then it's sort of like take the deep breath and run with it on the quilt itself.
Well, one of the things I love there is, okay, so now in that corner, let's just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
You've got the feathers, but then sections, you've got like pebbles and then other little feathers and leaves. Wow.
It really, for myself, this was actually a comment probably about 7 or 8 years ago when I first was entering some of my quilts. And so I had this wonderful fabric, and of course you can't really see a lot of my quilting until you get closer. So I had used the same quilting design throughout the whole quilt. Well, one of the judges' comments was, vary up the quilting style and design. So right away there, at first I'm going, I'm kind of grumbling, I want. But of course, you do take it to heart in the end. And so that was really one of my goals, is to say, all right, let me do some of this piece. And of course, there is the way that the wings are are flowing in and out, that there was more space in certain parts of the quilt. And that's where then I said, well, all right, let's try the bubbles here. And then I did sort of almost like a clamshell design, many of them where I've maybe seen them elsewhere, but it was again for myself,
Okay,
quite new.
so how many different designs in there would you say?
Oh, I would say at least six, at least six. So I mean, we've got the echoing, then I've got the clamshell, I've got the bubbles, I've got the feathers, and then I have a leaf design for sure. So at least those three, and changing up the scale, sort of the size of the quilting designs each time. But of course, realizing that I've got to make sure and keep the density of the quilting similar throughout the whole thing, so that it actually, of course, is going to lay flat in the end. And I do quilt fairly close together now, but not as close as some of those quilters are doing out there.
Well, was that on a domestic or on a long arm?
Definitely domestic. So I'm on my Bernina at home, but making sure that I've got the tables behind me set up so that on the side as well as the back of it to be help to hold the weight of the quilt.
Hey Wendy, have you gotten your hands on the extra long bed on the Bernina?
Not yet, not yet. So I know it's a matter of, there is more out there for sure to be able to help us along.
Exactly.
So
do you teach this class? And I'm throwing this out, because I think it would be a very valuable class.
I do. I teach actually an all-day class, sort of stitch to the finish line, where I do start with a walking foot and move to that darning foot, and introduce really lots of the basics of machine quilting. Then another workshop that I do is unabashed free motion quilting, and I've taught it at the big show, in Houston and such, and it's on my website as a half-day class, and it really is for me to be able to suggest that we can get ourselves to that point where we're not marking all the time, because I feel like often when I am creating that quilting design, if it's stitched or actually drawn out, that means I have to follow those lines exactly, and that suddenly causes me to freeze up. So I figure mine are more organic. That's the word I use a lot with my quilting lines, is that they're not, maybe those feathers are not exactly the same with each one along the way, or the leaves or the bubbles and such. And so that gives me a little more freedom to go and flow along as
hanging out with Ricky these days myself, they look different than yours, but I feel they're very organic. And this is what I know to be true, is that people's feathers are kind of like a fingerprint. I mean, they're all, none, you can almost, if you were really an expert, tell who's done what, etc.
Exactly. And that's what I think, for us to really free ourselves up. Every one of the quilting designs, I mean, you can see what's on the paper, you can see what else someone else has done, but as you start stitching it out, it becomes kind of your own signature, and that's what's fun about it.
Well, Wendy, what do you have coming up teaching where someone could check this out?
They could. will be at the Houston show, the International Quilt Festival, and so they're still taking registrations for that. I actually then will be in I was just at the Wisconsin Quilt Expo in Madison last weekend, and on my website I've got the locations of where I'll be teaching.
That's exactly what I was going to ask.
Yes, okay. Well, and I actually do have a booklet on unabashed free motion quilting designs and sort of my process, and it's 16 pages of a variety of different designs to jump off of. So that's on my pattern page on my website as well. So people can check that out.
Okay, well, have a great day.
Very good. You too. Thank you.
Thank you.